The night was heavy with rain, the kind that pounds against the world as if trying to wash it clean. Through the blur of his luxury car's windshield, a man worth millions, untouchable, admired, envied, was about to speed past another forgotten corner of the city. But then he froze. His heart slammed in his chest as his headlights revealed an elderly couple, huddled together, collapsed on the cold, flooded pavement. Their frail bodies shivered violently, soaked to the bone, as if life itself was slipping from their grasp. For a man who thought he had everything, that single moment shattered his world. Why were they there? How could anyone be left to suffer like this? And what choice would he make? The kind that would define not just his wealth, but his humanity. The rain hammered against the windshield, its rhythm almost deafening as the wipers fought to clear his view. He had driven these streets countless times, but never like this, never in such a storm, never with his chest tight and his thoughts lost in the chaos of water streaming across the glass. His car was warm, leather seats cradling him in comfort, the hum of the engine a reminder of how far he had come from the days when he didn't know if he would make rent. He was, by every standard, a success. A millionaire. A man who could silence the world with the swipe of a black card. But that night, all of that wealth, all of that comfort, felt meaningless the instant his headlights cut through the rain and revealed something he could not ignore. Two figures, huddled together, collapsed on the ground, their fragile bodies soaked as the storm mercilessly beat down on them. They looked like broken statues carved out of despair, shivering and still, almost swallowed by the darkness of the street. For a heartbeat, he didn't believe what he saw. Maybe it was a trick of the rain, a shadow cast strangely across the pavement. But then a hand twitched weakly, and his chest clenched so tightly it hurt. It was an elderly couple. Their thin clothes clung to their skin, their faces pale beneath the streetlight. They weren't just cold. They weren't just wet. They were collapsing, right there on the side of the road, as the city thundered on without them. His foot slammed against the brake, the tires screeching as the car jolted to a stop. He sat there for a second, gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles whitened. This couldn't be real. What were they doing out here in a storm like this? Why wasn't anyone helping them? His mind, trained to think in numbers, deals, outcomes, and risks, scrambled for logic. But there was none. Just two frail people, their bodies trembling on the flooded ground, clinging to each other as if they were all the other had left in the world. He could have kept driving. Nobody would have known. Nobody would have blamed him. After all, what could he do? He wasn't a doctor. He wasn't a rescuer. He was just a man who made money, who lived in a mansion high above the suffering he usually never saw. But his body wouldn't let him move. Something deep inside, something he thought had long been buried beneath years of business deals and luxury, kept his hands frozen on the wheel. His mind screamed at him to go, to pretend he hadn't seen, but his heart whispered something louder. Stop. Look. Help. The storm outside felt suddenly louder, as if daring him to step out of his cocoon of safety. He could feel the warmth of the car pressing against him, the contrast unbearable when he thought of how cold their bones must have been against the pavement. He remembered, against his will, a night long ago when he was a boy, huddled on a thin mattress in a small apartment with his mother. The rain had leaked through the cracked ceiling, and she had wrapped herself around him, whispering that everything would be all right even as her voice trembled with fear. For years, he had buried that memory under layers of success. But now, staring at the couple outside, it clawed its way back, raw and relentless. Before he realized it, he had pushed the door open. The storm roared into the car, slapping him with cold rain that drenched his clothes instantly. He hesitated only a second before rushing forward, his shoes splashing in the puddles that seemed to swallow the sidewalk. As he knelt beside them, the world seemed to fall away. The man was old, his hair plastered to his forehead, his lips trembling as he tried to shield the woman lying against him. She was limp, her breath shallow, her face pale against his chest. They looked so fragile, as if the next gust of wind could shatter them. Sir, the millionaire's voice cracked, softer than he expected. Ma'am, can you hear me? The old man's eyes fluttered open, clouded with exhaustion, but there was a flicker of life in them. He whispered something the storm almost swallowed. The millionaire had to lean close, his expensive suit soaking through, to hear it. Please, help her. The words struck him harder than any deal, any boardroom argument, any accolade ever had. This wasn't business. This wasn't a problem to fix with money. This was life. Fragile, fleeting, desperate life, clinging to the edge of survival. For the first time in years, he felt small, not as a tycoon, not as a man admired, but as a human staring at the fragility of another human. His hands shook as he reached for his phone, dialing emergency services with urgency he hadn't known in years. He shouted their location into the receiver, his voice breaking as rain pounded his head. "They need help now. Please, send someone now." The operator's calm voice promised assistance, but minutes suddenly felt like hours. So he stayed. He knelt in the water, his knees pressed against the pavement, his hands trembling as he touched the old man's shoulder. "Hold on," he whispered, his voice soft but desperate. "You're not alone. I'm here. Just hold on." The old man nodded weakly, his lips trembling, but his arms tightened around the woman. Watching them, something inside the millionaire shifted. He realized that all his wealth, his empire, his power meant nothing if he couldn't answer this call of humanity. He had built a fortress around himself, guarded by wealth and status, but tonight, that fortress had crumbled in the rain. He wasn't just a millionaire anymore. He was a man on his knees in the storm, begging strangers to hold on to life. The sound of distant sirens finally broke through the storm. Relief flooded him, but it was tangled with something heavier, something that shook him to his core. He realized he had been given a choice that night, the kind of choice that defines who a person truly is. And for the first time in a long time, he chose not as the millionaire, not as the businessman, but as the boy who once knew what it meant to be cold, afraid, and forgotten. The rain poured harder, but he didn't move. He stayed until help arrived, until hands more skilled than his took over, until the old couple was lifted from the ground. Even then, as he stood drenched and trembling, he couldn't look away. He had stopped. He had seen. He had felt. And nothing in his world would ever be the same. The storm outside seemed to echo the storm raging within him. His hands were still locked on the steering wheel, fingers pressing so hard the leather creaked beneath them. He stared straight ahead at the blur of rain, but his mind was no longer focused on the road. It was on the two fragile bodies crumpled against each other on the flooded pavement. He could feel his chest tightening, breath uneven, as if the decision of whether to move or stay had become heavier than any he had made in a boardroom. A lifetime of discipline, calculation, and detachment screamed at him to keep going. It wasn't his problem. This was the city's problem, the government's problem, anyone's problem but his. He wasn't a rescuer. He wasn't a saint. He was a businessman, one who had built walls high enough to keep out the cries of the world. What did it matter if he stopped? Wouldn't it just complicate his night, put him in a situation where he had no control? He had meetings tomorrow, plans to finalize, projects to oversee. He couldn't let himself get tangled in something so messy, so raw, so human. But then the other voice spoke. Quieter, deeper, almost drowned by the rain but undeniable all the same. It wasn't the voice of the tycoon, not the one polished by years of wealth and success. It was the voice of the boy he used to be. The boy who had known hunger, who had watched his mother sacrifice meals so he could eat, who had felt the gnawing shame of wearing shoes with holes in the soles. He remembered nights lying awake in the dark, hearing his mother cry softly, praying for help that never came. He remembered how invisible they had felt, walking past people who never looked down, never saw them. And now here he was, years later, in the seat of a car worth more than his mother's entire lifetime earnings, staring at people who were exactly as invisible as he once had been. The battle inside him grew sharper. His logical side scoffed, telling him that stopping would change nothing. What could he do for them? He wasn't a doctor, and even if he got them help, would it matter? They looked so frail, as though the rain itself could crush them. The most efficient thing to do, the safest thing, was to keep driving. The storm would hide his shame, drown out the sound of his conscience. No one would ever know. Yet the moment he thought of pressing the accelerator, his stomach turned. It was as if his body rejected the very idea. He leaned back into the seat, rain hammering the glass, his own reflection staring back at him in the faint glow of the dashboard. What did all the money mean if he could look into that reflection and see a coward? What was the point of building an empire if he couldn't answer a single call for compassion? The inner conflict clawed at him, relentless. He had spent years convincing himself that wealth was the answer, that success was measured by towers built and accounts overflowing. But none of that could silence the image burned into his mind. The old man curled over his wife, their bodies trembling, the rain soaking their paper-thin clothes. The picture haunted him, like a mirror held up to his soul, asking him who he truly was. For a brief second, he imagined what it would feel like to drive away. He could already hear the silence inside his mansion, echoing against marble floors. He could see himself pouring a drink, staring at the city lights, telling himself he'd had no choice. But deep down, he knew the guilt would follow him, eating away at him with every clink of ice in the glass, every sleepless night. He would never escape the knowledge that when he had the chance to be more than a man defined by wealth, he had failed. And then the other vision came to him. He saw himself stepping out, kneeling beside them, offering even the smallest gesture of humanity. He imagined the old man's eyes meeting his, maybe with gratitude, maybe just with the relief of knowing they weren't invisible after all. That image didn't promise ease, it didn't promise that everything would work out, but it promised something he hadn't felt in years, meaning. The weight of the choice pressed down on him. It wasn't about practicality. It wasn't about money. It was about who he was in that moment, and who he would be when he looked back on this night years from now. He thought of his mother again, her voice whispering through the decades. We may not have much, but we have kindness. Never let the world take that away. He had let the world take it away. He had traded kindness for ambition, compassion for profit. But now, maybe, just maybe, he could reach for it again. His chest ached with the conflict, every second stretching longer, the storm outside roaring louder as though urging him to decide. The man who had made split-second decisions worth millions now trembled over the simplest one, to stop or to go. And yet, he knew this decision weighed more than any business deal. This wasn't about profit or loss. This was about his soul. Slowly, as if his hands no longer belonged to him, he reached for the door handle. The storm's roar grew sharper, colder, invading the warmth of his car. He hesitated, the last flicker of doubt whispering that once he stepped out, he couldn't go back. He would be vulnerable, exposed, forced to face not only the storm but the humanity he had hidden from for so long. But then he glanced through the windshield one last time. The old man's arm shifted, weakly pulling the woman closer, his body shielding her against the storm in an act of love so fierce it broke through every wall the millionaire had built around himself. He felt tears sting his eyes, hot against the cold that had begun to seep into the car. The conflict inside him shattered in that instant. He realized that wealth without humanity was emptiness. He realized that power without compassion was weakness. He realized that to drive away would be to kill something inside himself that could never be revived. So he opened the door. The rain hit him like 1,000 needles, soaking his clothes, chilling his bones. But for the first time in years, he felt alive. He stepped into the storm not as the millionaire, not as the tycoon, but as a man choosing to see, choosing to care, choosing to remember the boy he once was. And as he moved toward the couple, kneeling beside them in the flood of rain, he felt the weight inside him shift. The battle wasn't over, but he had chosen a side. The side that whispered of humanity, of compassion, of something more enduring than money could ever buy. Thanks for watching video. Please like, subscribe.